Start then with the recording. Thank you, Lauren. And why don't we look to see if there are any members from the public that would like to say anything? My favorite groupie is here, as ever.
No one has their hand raised though.
Excellent. In that case, hearing none, do we have, and I'm sorry, Lauren, it's been a busy week for me. I didn't check. Do we have minutes?
Yes, from January 12th.
And one change, I wasn't
Sure.
present, so.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And I confess not to have looked at them, so I think I will abstain for not reviewing. But if that's the case, is there a motion to approve them as written?
I would move to approve them as written. They are succinct.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Right.
And I'll abstain from a lack of reading.
This doesn't
Okay.
happen again, Joe.
I know. I'm sorry. It's an ironic week for me not to do my homework. That being said, I think why don't we move directly into our honored guests who are here. We've gotten to the point in our review, Pete and Ira, where we have a basket of issues and questions for you guys in your review specifically. But we're largely through, I think, most of our kind of tougher decision pieces. Some of the things that I think I wanted to highlight from last time, and please anyone chime in case I missed some of the big ones. We're very curious if you guys have any comparative information on how towns are dealing with their charter to reflect the states of emergency, where I think probably a lot of towns are experiencing that as a, hey, we went through this thing, how do we do it better? So I think we'd be very up for information on that. We also highlight a series of questions within the charter for legal review that had a lot to do with interplay with state statute and questions of, is this clear enough? And I don't think there was any other single subject matter interest beyond that, unless anyone remembers one off the top of their head. I think the rest of it was just in the notes. Lauren, did I miss anything?
No, I think you're good.
All right. So if you can save us on that emergency powers thing, that would be really, really great. If you
Well,
find done it well.
I got to back up on this, Joe, a little bit.
Sure, please.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Ira Bloom. Pete Gelderman is here too. So look, I've got to be direct about where we are and what Pete and I have been doing the last few weeks. You know, our involvement has been sporadic, I'll say. And we haven't had the benefit of a lot of the committee's deliberations. And I know you've worked pretty hard on this for probably a year or more. In any event, on December 16, we got the email from Lauren and it said, can we go over this paragraph by paragraph? So I took that quite literally, as did Pete, and we've been looking at it paragraph by paragraph, both of us. And then we have sat and compared our own notes and put this all together for tonight's presentation as best we could, not having heard all the analysis. Admittedly, there is some indication in the marked up copy as to your thought process and some questions, but you know, we haven't heard a lot of what has been discussed. What I have to tell you is this very directly. We independently went through this. We have notes, comments, corrections, suggestions on virtually every page and on most, but not all sections. And I just have to say directly that this draft, in our opinion, needs substantial work. There are sections that are not consistent with Connecticut law. There are sections that are not clear. And there are sections that are redundant, and we can discuss paragraph by paragraph. A lot of it deals with the town meeting sections, but there are sections dealing with the selectmen, board of selectmen, first selectmen salaries. We can go through this paragraph by paragraph, and if we're going to do our job right as attorneys, we should go through it paragraph by paragraph. That is a long process. Won't be finishing that tonight. We can start it if you'd like, or we can do it any way you want. But if you want the benefit of our advice, we really need to go through this slowly and completely. And not all tonight, obviously, but over a period of weeks, allocating some time if you'd like to do. It's entirely up to you what you want to do and how you want to do it and what you want us to do. But I just have to tell you, we've spent multiple hours since December 16 trying to go through this and mark it up and make corrections. And a lot of these sections do need work. A lot of them are fine. And I know you spent a lot of time on it and I applaud you for that, but it needs work.
Well, Ira, we do it once a decade, so it'd be kind of nice if we got it right. So that might
Right.
be useful. Can you tell me roughly then where you are in the review in terms of how far into the document and what your time frame would be to
Yeah,
review?
no, we finished our review. What we've got to do now is go through it with you. Some of it is just our legal conclusions. Some of it we have recommendations that you'll want to weigh in on. Some of it should just be rewritten.
Yeah.
Not all the new stuff, but some of the old stuff that you left in. It's both. Pete, you
you're
want
fine.
to elaborate anything just so we get it all on the table?
No, I mean, Ira and I went over, we compared notes as Ira said, and we did some of that this afternoon. We started at the beginning of the document and got through about 8 pages together in about an hour and a half. So that's the two of us discussing the things that we had sort of decided were significant, and it took just to go over the first 8 pages. We've both reviewed all 40 pages of the proposed charter. So we have notes on every section, but that's why I think Ira's mentioning that it's a long process, because I'm sure for every comment we have, there may be questions and comments from each of you. So, and again, as Ira said, we'll do it any way you'd like to do it. And, we recognize that you're the commission, not us, but that's kind of where we are. I mean, it's.
Well, wouldn't it make sense then? So if your comments, are they consolidated in the Word doc? Because, one thing to do. Oh.
I mean, they're handwritten notes at this point.
Yeah, we elected to do this independently to see what we came up with what we each came up with. And a lot of what we both came up with is common, but each of us had comments that the other didn't have. And so we discussed those as well. It's easy enough to put comments into the Word document. But it's a little harder to explain why and why we got to that language or that suggestion in the Word document. That's a little bit cumbersome. It's a little easier, I think, to do that orally in a discussion.
Well, let me, so what?
I just, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to keep interrupting you, Joe, but just to give you sort of a overview, I mean, there's some things that just are not consistent with other Connecticut laws. Those might be a limited number, but they have to be pointed out. They're chunks of the town meeting sections dealing with the annual town meeting, the review, the audit report, the budget town meeting, and all that are not clear. And the terminology is confusing in our opinion, and that we'd like to see that rewritten. For instance, the annual town meeting, I think it's called, that had been scheduled previously for the first 45 days of the year. I remember we talked about this a year ago, and both Pete and I said we never heard of that, frankly, and so it's crossed out that it's in the first 45 days of the year. I don't know when it is, and it's to review the audit report. That shouldn't be your town meeting. That shouldn't be your annual town meeting, just as a start. That's the first thing you get to when you read about town meetings. The reconciliation meeting is next. Neither Pete nor I understood what that meant. We literally just don't know what is being reconciled from reading the language. So that's the second town meeting. Nowhere does it talk about the annual town budget meeting, which is what is commonly referred to by other towns to be the budget meeting, which is really the main point of the town meeting, to talk about the town's budget. And it's not in there. It's at the back at some later point.
Right, but it shows up in the Board of Finance process.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, it's, you know, the charter document should be a Bible for people to read and understand. And it shouldn't take a lawyer. It should be understandable. There ought to be an index. And someone ought to be able to look up how the town budget works, process works, and what the annual town meeting is, or the budget meeting. And I'm sorry, this sounds unduly harsh, but this does not seem to be a very clear document to us. To go, that's one example, focusing on the town meetings. And there are other sections that we should talk about. It's at that larger level. That's very important. And then we have a variety, an abundance of smaller changes where the wording is just either awkward or not normally what we see in a legal type document. So we have a lot of those changes, not controversial, but changes to help, and a few other technical things like that. So some large, some small, but the large ones we feel should be addressed, discussed, and hopefully rewritten. And
So, Ira, if I could, on a process basis,
Mhm.
so what I think would be easier, and I'd like to open up to the commission, is we have everyone here tonight. So I'd like to review, so for instance, some of the language you're talking about within the town meeting structure is a combination of us changing the process to it, but some of the structure and language is legacy language.
Mhm.
Going over some of those items now while we're together
Yeah.
would be great. What
Sure.
would have been perhaps more helpful is, or would be helpful going forward, is to distribute to the commission a document with your comments on it so we could read them independently rather than going through it page by page. That's going to commit us to another month or 2 months of meetings. And then come together and see if we can either, kind of work through it more quickly, or if when you're putting in your comments by section, simply give us a proposal for what you want or a question. If there are areas where that you should really be calling it this. Well, Ira, you see a lot of charters. We don't. That would be great.
Yeah.
There's the part of, I think, what you're responding to is that the charter may have existed this way for quite some time.
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
So that would be fine.
Yeah. All right.
If you have sections where there are questions like, I'm having a problem, I don't see the purpose of this meeting. Do you want to A, clarify it, or B, delete it? That would be nice, because then if we saw them, we could distribute it to the group, get together, and then form sort of an agenda of ticking through. What I'm leery of is doing a protracted meeting on sections where everyone's seeing it for the first time
Mhm.
and not advancing it on. Now, I kind of want to just open it to the commission and get your thoughts.
Yeah, well, that's a fair point. Yeah, I don't mean to drop this on you. I'm sorry, but
No.
we
Yeah,
haven't had a lot of opportunities.
You tried to call me, this afternoon.
Yeah,
and
I did. That was what I wanted to say to you, Joe, but we couldn't connect. So that
problem.
happens. That happens. I know.
Yeah, that's okay. So let me open up to my commission for a second and get your thoughts, because now what we're getting is a substantial review from legal beyond sort of the questions we asked them and the thoughts, and that's good advice. And we should say we're doing this once every 10 years. Let's do this now.
Well,
And
can I just correct? I don't mean to be argumentative, but we thought we had a dozen or so questions that Lauren had passed on for the prior meeting, and I thought, well, all right, maybe that's it. And then, but then I reread this, several times. It said, please now, we'd like you to go through this paragraph by paragraph.
Yeah,
And I wanted to see if we can get any further clarification. We couldn't connect. This is back several weeks ago. So we just went through it paragraph by paragraph.
Oh, that's
That's
fine.
not the problem. That's great. I'm
No,
glad
that's
you did
good.
it.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was speaking for myself, yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to say there are ways that we can conform this to how charters are presented. to
Yeah, I mean,
clarify.
we're really trying to help, obviously, and
Oh.
just trying to find the right process. I know you opened it up, but your
No,
point is
it's-
well taken that, maybe we can give you, something in writing to sort of highlight. I guess what I don't want to do is, redraft it and then have a discussion, because then we'll redraft it, yet again. So maybe we could highlight the sections, with our commentary as to why we think this should be.
Yeah, because that's effectively how we did it with staff comments and
Yeah.
everything else.
Okay.
So first thing, let me go back to the end of the commission.
Yeah.
Process basis, does that, suggestions from the group?
So I think as a reflection about what Ira and Pete had just said, I think this is disappointing for sure. We put a lot of time into it. We have tried to keep the spirit of the charter, article by article, going forward. So obviously, I think this is not solely indicative on our work, but maybe the charter, even what it was before, right? But again, I'm glad that we're doing this. And as Joe says that, it's once every 10 years or so. So I think it's important to get it right this time. And Joe, I like your idea. I would like to get, the readout from the attorneys so that we can each digest it and then come back and have a very efficient meeting from here on out.
Yeah, and Matt, just let me say it, I think it's 85 or 90% existing charter that creates a lot of these issues. It's not the suggested changes, it's not the amendments. There's a couple of those that we question maybe the language or how it, but primarily what we're looking at is the existing charter more than anything else. So it's not a reflection of the work that this commission is doing. It's more of a, do you agree, Ira? I mean, I think it's.
Yeah, no, that's a key point. Believe me, I thought about how I was going to drop this on you, at 5:30 for the first time. I didn't feel, I wasn't looking forward to it.
Yeah,
frankly.
next time bring cocktails, Ira. Jesus, terrible host.
I got mine right here.
Hey,
We have our cocktails right here.
Oh,
right?
I was gonna say, we all
Yeah.
are at home, so we can all.
Well, actually, Pete and I are in the
We can deal with
office.
this problem immediately.
No.
Yeah, we're the only ones that don't have access, I think, right now. But that
And I
is a
think
key.
some of the concerns that you brought up, we had discussions about too. And I think that
Yeah.
I think the reconciliation meetings and things like that. So I think that this is a good way to do it. And if it takes some time, then it takes some time. But like Joe said, I think we need to get it right. I would like to get it right.
Yeah, but Pete is correct. A lot of it is the existing structure. And I guess because we've had some gaps of time, we didn't know what the product was gonna look like. And you've added a lot of clarifications and a lot of updates. And you've added a lot of good stuff, but we do have some comments on the new parts. But the real problems, I think, still lie with some of the old charter structure. And we are seeing this now kind of for the first time, having been asked to go over, what looked like a, close to finished product. And if you're going to do it once every 10 years, we might as well address it. Look, you may decide that, the audit report meeting is very important. That's fine. The reconciliation, you have to explain it, I think, first, but that's fine. But let's at least clarify the language, the names.
I don't think
things
you're
like
gonna,
that.
going to find a recalcitrant commission on that kind of stuff, Ira. And I do think there's a little bit of a disadvantage because we know what they are because we know the meetings are held. But I think that's the advantage of having people read it who don't do that. I'm sorry, Dave, did you have something? I felt like I talked over you just before.
No, I mean, I kind of agree. I think be helpful to read the comments. Our intent was to simplify the document. So I in a way we were kind of putting a square peg in a round hole, because while we were simplifying, we were also kind of sticking with the structure and the form of the old charter. So I understand completely, Ira, what you're saying. But certainly our intent was to simplify it. But I definitely agree. I think if we had the ability to kind of read your comments, that would certainly help, and then have a discussion. I think that'd be more efficient.
Liz, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with what's been said. And I think it is, I'm probably one of the few on here that probably had the least direct understanding at the level at some who participated more in, the town government. And looking at the lens of some of kind of the governance piece of it as it relates to keeping the charter so that it maintains a certain amount of what, the historical and all of that, then, not fixing something that's not broken, but also modernizing it enough, especially seeing what we just went through, I think, to the point of, we won't do this again for another 10 years. So, I think that that's too a little bit of what the challenge was, is that, when we talked about things like you have to put it in the newspaper or whatever, and, the things that just aren't happening anymore, it'd be a shame to not really look at this in kind of real time. But it is that balance of keeping kind of that historical and that piece of it that makes what Madison and the charter and the uniqueness versus kind of modernizing it. So I think it would be extremely helpful to see what you all have written, and, thank you for all that input, because I think it's going to be helpful, because I think we all, having said it, wanted to do it and have it be right.
So Ira, maybe, I'm sorry, Bob, did I skip over you?
Yeah, just three quick points. One is that I would really like to read these comments and think about them. I'm slow on my feet, but if I can do that in advance of the meeting.
That is just not true, but okay.
The quality of my participation will improve immeasurably. And if Liz is not terribly aware of how Madison governs itself, I am less aware than she is. And so I agree with Ira's point entirely that, this is something that somebody should pick up who's an outsider and say, okay, now I see how they do this and how it works. And that's important. My final thing is that, more than once, Lauren has said, well, we kind of like ignore that part of what's in the charter. This is how we get around that. That needs to be fixed. So it's an honest statement of how we do things. So, yeah, I appreciate your work. I think you're not misbehaving here and going paragraph by paragraph. I'm glad you did.
Exactly what you should be doing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, just to be clear, I don't think when you see the comments, we're not changing the structure or traditions of Madison's government at all, actually.
That's probably a criticism, by the way, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was
Maybe
curious
we
because when I
should.
got this draft, a year ago when we first started talking, there was some talk about, do we want a town manager? Do we want this and that? I was kind of curious because I didn't know how you might have come out, but, you kept things pretty much intact, and, we respect that. It's not up to us, but we are trying to streamline things just a bit, particularly the abundance of town meetings here that have different names, in some cases inconsistent with what the statutes say, and it doesn't change the process. You're still going to have a first selectman, board of selectmen, board of finance, town meeting. I mean, so I want to make that clear. We're not changing things, and
And Ira.
But there is a, I'm sorry, I mean, there is a little bit of a philosophical question though for you to think about, which is, I think I said this a year ago, how many town meetings do you really want to have? And how easy or difficult do you want it? And I even read that in some of what you put in here, 1,200 people, 1,200 signatures or 500 signatures or whatever, increasing the thresholds and all that. And so, there is a little bit of an update that you already put in there. And I think that's excellent. And some of our comments reflect on that. Just personally, this is personal opinion based on experience and other observations. I don't think people are that anxious to run out too often to town meetings. The younger generation are busy. They barely have time to vote. But at the same time, you have a tradition, as many towns do, of having at least a town meeting to talk about budget, and you want to have an option to have other town meetings to talk about other things, ordinances, whatever. That's preserved. So there's some streamlining to do.
I think in general, to the extent you and Pete are suggesting clunking pieces out of the charter, that things that don't need to be, and we'll all make the air quotes, charterized. I think that you'll find a very amenable charter review commission to try and do things like that. And also knowing, frankly, what's customary among the charters in Connecticut. That's just not obvious to any of us, no matter how many other charters we take a look at. So, that was part of the reason, frankly, why we reached out to you guys. We know you do a lot of that type of advising. Not every firm has a municipal practice center like you guys do. So that would be incredibly helpful to us. So if we could, so, for this meeting, if there's a section you think would be particularly helpful to talk about now that we have the commission mustered, that would be good if you thought there was an area that you wanted our immediate feedback to. Otherwise, what I'd really like to see is the document that Lauren, and if you have a better way to do this, please, Ira, I would like to minimize attorney time, of course, as I'm sure you would. You guys are busy. But there's the document that Lauren sent to you that had the sort of the highlights and the discussion points was a very useful format for us to be able to look at a section and decide. So if there's any way you could sort of put your thinking or suggestions into a Word doc that we could see.
Yeah. I was going to ask.
I'd like to kind of give it to the commission for homework and say, everybody read through and then come to your opinions, and then let's get together. And then I think we'll just be faster, because we're sort of at that time. We know by this point in time, we know the charter that's there. So some things that might seem controversial or discussion worthy to you might be yeah, that sounds good to the entire commission.
I was going to ask Lauren if you could, maybe again, but it would be convenient if you could send us another Word version of the charter, the last draft of the charter as revised by this commission, unannotated, if that's possible. Maybe I have it, but if you could send it again, and then what we could do is try to do the same thing, our comments per section or something like that, just to lower expectations a little bit. I think we can. You'll get the gist of a lot of it, I think, if we write our comments in different sections, but some of it involves just slight rewordings and things like that. And
just do the underline and cross out thing as a recommendation. And
all right, I can try to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you
need a little bit of time, because that's just takes a little bit of time to do.
Because one other thing I was thinking about too is off something that Joan said, you might be looking at language and structures that aren't 10 or 20 years old, but depending on what the prior Charter Review Commission did beforehand, this could be 30-year-old language, or more so. So, and it's very possible that no one's actually taken a good look at some of these sections in a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, Pete, do you want to, do we want to pick?
The last time it was reviewed, that was the last time it was done. And then I mean, we did go sentence by sentence
Yeah.
through the whole thing and made a lot of changes back then that never got approved. So we're back to that same kind of, logic here.
Do you want to take a few minutes to talk about some of this, some of these, just as a kind of example, the town, we could start, because I've highlighted a few times with, the town meeting section, which,
I was going to suggest that, because what you're describing, I think sounds easy. Maybe think about the sections that you think you'd need guidance for us, or if you have something that's up for a quick decision so we can save time, would be great. But let's do the town meeting, because my suspicion is if we had the language on the screen and you talked about what you had in mind, you'd get a lot of, yeah, that sounds good. Not including a reconciliation meeting as a charter requirement. I don't know if anyone here is diehard meeting reconciliation fans. I know you all might be disappointed not to go to it, but like that might be a very interesting point. So do you want to do that piece?
well, all right. Yeah, you want to start with 2.141, 2.1.4.1 annual town meeting.
Sure. Lauren, are you controlling it?
I
Yep.
mean, okay.
Okay. And Lauren,
Um,
which document is in front of us?
This is just the red line. This is not the analysis document with your notes. Do you want that one instead?
Yeah, why don't you try and put that one up just because what I'm thinking is that's the one that when Ira and Pete put their comments in, that's the format that seemed to work well for us. So maybe if you could put that one up in front of us, we could all sort of be looking at the way that we used the working document. Does that make sense?
Sure.
I was asking Lauren, she knows more than us.
Oh,
Should be good then.
There we go.
so look, I'll just start with this. 2.141 says annual town meeting. And there's a variety of things to talk about. There's a special town meeting, there's the annual budget reconciliation meeting, and then there's some budget meeting that maybe is sort of unnamed later. But for clarity, for simplicity, and for consistency with the state statute, it seems to us that there ought to be one designated annual town meeting. And in fact, in a lot of towns, it's called the annual town budget meeting, ATBM. And that's the meeting that occurs after the Board of Finance recommends a budget. And if I recall properly, Pete, you can correct me. It doesn't, this document doesn't even say the Board of Finance recommends the budget, but that's statutorily what the Board of Finance does to the town meeting. So that's a later correction we'll get to at some point. But
That happens later on in our charter. There's a different meeting that we bring that to.
Yeah.
Right.
It
But
is.
what I'm saying is that I think in most towns, when they talk about the annual town meeting or the annual town budget meeting, they're talking about the meeting that occurs, in May, let's say. And it's often it's universally the budget meeting, and sometimes they add things to it because you can do that sometimes. So here we're starting with something which originally read, I remember saying this last year, at the beginning of the year, because I read this last year and I said, what in the world is this? There shall be an annual town meeting held in the evening. I'll stop right there. I've run into situations where, like because of COVID, they wanted to do it outside. They wanted to do it during the day. So I just raised that as something for you to think about. Do you want to say necessarily that any meeting has to be in the evening? Something to think about.
I understand why that language would have been included once upon a time to expand participation.
Yep,
I'll hold an
exactly.
annual town meeting at 2:00 in the afternoon, that way, 90% of anyone can't go.
Yeah, well, it could be abused without that restriction evening. So it's something to think about. I'm just pointing that out. These are small things. I'm glad he took out 7:30 because that, who knows, maybe it should be at 7 or 8, but whatever, that's out. But it did say originally no later than 45 days from the start of each calendar year. And I remember last year looking at that and saying, an annual meeting by the middle of February. And what in the world is that about? So that was taken out. I see, I didn't see when this was to be held, but it's to present the audit report. And no disrespect to the auditors, but that doesn't warrant a town meeting, in my opinion. Now, if you tell me you get throngs of people that come out for the audit report every year in February, then I'll stand back.
As someone who used to be part of the
Joey,
audit committee.
Do you
I hope-
remember, we would actually bet on the number of public that would come,
Yeah.
and that didn't include staff that was required to be there.
Less than 10, I bet.
Yeah,
So Ira, is the
Well, you
idea?
can now, but I mean, I don't mean to sound snarky about it. You can certainly have a meeting to present the audit report and should, but in the state of the town report. But I guess my thinking is that we probably should not call it the annual town meeting. And it could be presented to the selectmen. It could be presented to the Board of Finance, seems to me. I just don't know if it rises to the level of an annual town meeting.
So Ira is.
You
Ira-
can if you want, but
Yes, Ira, if I could. So I think what you're telling me is that there's a term of art, which is the annual town budget meeting, that means something else. We're labeling an annual town meeting that doesn't meet what most people would expect.
I
we
think
should-
so. Yeah. Do you agree,
we should
Pete?
Probably.
It goes a
include the-
little beyond that because the statute that talks about adopting a budget says the budget shall be adopted at the annual town meeting. That's what
Oh.
the statute reads.
Perfect. All right. So basically we have a statute, because if you read this, this is describing a meeting that will be held annually,
Right.
which God knows when they made the annual town meeting, but the statute refers to something else at the annual town meeting.
The annual
So-
town.
Yeah.
meeting is kind of-
So it's the name. As I say, a report from the auditors is important. Again, with meetings being televised and all that, do you need to crank up the town meeting mechanism for this? I don't think so personally. And I think you could probably get by with, putting it as part of a normal Board of Finance.
The thing that
Board
would
of
be,
Select-
the thing that would be worth preserving, Ira, because it would be a change, is the state of the town report from the first selectman
Mhm.
is typically at an annual meeting open to the public. And that's one thing that is there. So if we want to call that the state of the town meeting, that shall be a town meeting with the first selectman, then that would then free up and get us away from the statutory annual
Yeah,
town.
it could be a special town meeting.
but I guess let's talk about the point here. If it's within 45 days and you've got a new,
But they took that out. That's crossed out on my version. So I
Right.
don't know. I don't even know when this is now.
I'm thinking that, do we even need this meeting at all? I mean, we can have the state of a town report be done under the first selectman's responsibilities, must be done annually.
Wasn't
No,
there a
they-
requirement, Pete? Did you tell me or something that for an annual meeting, or not an annual town meeting, but some? That's one question I have, whether there is some requirement for a meeting like this. But we're not going to call it the annual town meeting.
So
No, there's not a requirement for a town meeting to go over the audit.
No,
no,
no.
not the audit, but the first selectman's state of the town.
And there's no requirement for that to be a town meeting. It can be. You can do that in a town meeting.
I could just tell you in recent years, like the last, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, the town of Westport started this, it was new, state of the town message from the first selectman and the Board of Ed chair. And they decided to hold it. It's a public meeting. It's announced as, state of the town meeting. It's on a Sunday. I never go, but it's on a Sunday. And The first selectman speaks, Board of Ed chair speaks, state of the town. It's televised on the, the public station. It's videoed. You could see it the next day. And actually, despite my comments, I've been told that they've gotten, I think, 50 to 100 people who come out and listen and are curious about it. So
What time of the year is it held?
it's coming up very soon. I think it's late, or maybe it's February, January, February.
Within 45 days of the beginning of the year.
Yeah, so maybe it's the same. Yeah,
So I think just to not dwell here, I think your point's well taken. My proposal, subject to the commission, is that we can keep the idea of that our elected officials give a state of the town address. And then, Joan, we can talk in a subsequent environment about whether or not that requires an annual town meeting, or it can be done at a first selectmen's meeting that are open to the public, for that type of thing. Though I do like the Board of Ed chair tied in too, but that's a different point.
I suppose you could just put it in as a separate section and call it, state of the town meeting, and just say, once per year, before the end of February, the first selectman and the Board of Ed chairs shall present their messages on state of the town at a public meeting, or something like that.
You could
Well,
also do it as an ordinance as opposed to a charter provision.
Oh,
If
I was channeling my inner Walker. I was thinking that Joan, that you were onto something, making that an obligation of the first selectman under the first selectman section.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if we could, just to bump this point for a second, if you would care to restructure an annual town budget meeting language as you would expect to see from other charters, then as the annual meeting, so we're now into that interplay with the statute, which is actually kind of cool. That would be very helpful to us, unless Lauren, unless you have something you think we can just draw on that we've already written. Nope. Okay. All right.
Can I just make a general comment about the annual budget meeting, or the annual meeting, as the statute calls it? It's really, it's pretty simple. It does, the Board of Finance recommends a budget that has gone through a process prior to getting to the Board of Finance, which is through the executive branch, and then they present a budget, whether it's the first selectman or the Board of Selectmen presents that budget to the Board of Finance, and then the Board of Finance recommends a budget which can be higher or lower than what is recommended or what is put before them by the executive branch. Then they present that budget to the legislative body, in this case, the town meeting. And the budget includes the Board of Ed, and it includes the town budget. The only difference between Board of Ed and town is Board of Ed budget, the Board of Finance cannot adjust line items on the Board of Education budget. They can't go into the detail of the budget and change things. They can approve the bottom line, or they can lower the bottom line or approve the bottom line. They usually don't increase the bottom line because it's coming from the Board of Ed. But they can't go through the line items. But with the town budget, they do that. Then they recommend it to in this case, to the town meeting. The town meeting cannot increase the budget that's been presented to them by the Board of Finance. They can adopt it or they can reduce it. And the town meeting can actually look at line items, not for the Board of Ed. Again, the Board of Ed is a one number adoption. Either it's the bottom line. Individual town budgets can be adjusted by both the Board of Finance and the town meeting, as long as the town meeting doesn't increase those budget items. So that's just a little kind of a budget process. That is the way it works in all towns in Connecticut.
Pete, I was on board with everything you said, and it's very familiar to us, except for one thing. You said the town meeting can reduce the size of the budget.
No. The town, yes, they can.
Yeah, they can.
I thought their option was to accept or reject.
No, they can.
No,
They can't increase, but they can decrease.
they can decrease it, yeah.
But you see, it's complicated in a town meeting setting, because then it would have to go to a question on a ballot in all likelihood.
Right.
Look,
Is you-
the way, I'm sorry to name names in terms of towns, but the town of Wilton has what I think is a good system that works, and it's as Pete described. So once it gets passed, recommended is the word, from the board, by the Board of Finance, it starts with the selectmen, it goes to the Board of Finance, they recommend it to the town meeting. The town meeting by charter has to be the first week in May. So there's a little flexibility, but it does have to be a certain time period for good reason, because you got to have enough time eventually to print the tax bills, et cetera, et cetera. So they have a quorum requirement, as you do. And then the town meeting occurs. The town meeting can reduce an appropriation. So a budget, Board of Ed only bottom line. But on the town side, they could reduce, let's say, the police budget. So it becomes a drama every year, candidly, but that's part of democracy, where because, see, what comes out of the town meeting in Wilton, the ATBM, they call it, then goes by charter to a machine vote the next week. But if there's a reduction at the town meeting of, let's say, for example, $1 million from the Board of Ed budget, then that reduced amount is what gets put on the machine ballot. So the town meeting is very important. And there's always a concern that, you know, among the parents that, well, they better get enough people out to the meeting so it doesn't get reduced, because that's what's going to go on the machine ballot. So that's okay. That's democracy. If you believe in something, you better go down to the town meeting and vote and participate. But the system works. It goes to automatically to a machine vote. And then there's certain requirements with that too. They require that a certain percentage of the town actually vote. You have to have a certain turnout. I think it's 15%, or it's invalid. But those are some details we could talk
Yeah,
about.
I think this, let's try and adhere, I think, to the system of meetings and votes that we've got, which is slightly different. And that we have our budget meeting, it's presented at the budget meeting, the Board of Finance recommends to the Board of Selectmen, and then it shows up for referendum and direct vote where people can accept or reject.
Right, but
They
it's a
don't
public
recommend the
hearing.
Board of
It's not a town meeting, though. It's a public
Right.
hearing.
The
Right.
Board
So
of Finance doesn't recommend to the Board of Selectmen.
I'm
The
sorry,
Board of Selectmen presents a budget to the, maybe you, yeah,
I said it backwards.
okay, yeah. Okay.
The board,
Oh,
the
yeah, you stumped me.
Board
Yeah.
of Selectmen, the Board of Finance, it's a conversation we've been having. Board of Finance ultimately advances the budget to a referendum,
To a town meeting.
to a, it
No,
goes.
we go directly to the referendum. We don't do a
directly to the
town meeting.
referendum.
You skipped the
We call
town
it a
meeting.
referendum, but it's technically the machine vote of the town meeting. A
Well, we don't,
referendum-
it's not a meeting. It's a
There's
public
no-
hearing. There's
there's
no
no-
voting. There's no registering. There's nothing on this.
There's
that
no
happens.
physical meeting where people get in the auditorium and talk about the budget
There
recommended
is
by
a
the Board of
physical meeting
Finance.
where the Board of
It's a
Finance.
hearing, not a meeting.
Yeah,
hearing
so the
before the
Board of
Board.
Finance advances the first budget, like, here's the draft we're thinking about. Then there's a series of back and forth with the major boards and everyone else, and we have the budget process. Then they come and they hold a public hearing, Joan's quite right, for the
Who's that?
budget they're
The bo-
proposing to send to vote.
Yeah, the Board of Finance as a public hearing,
Finance.
correct, yeah.
Then the
But-
Board of
but-
Finance,
Board of Finance, yeah.
yeah, the Board of Finance then, takes in public comment. They may or may not make a change, usually that evening. And then they vote on the budget that's being submitted for the populace to vote on.
Right,
And
okay.
so the budget then goes up or down. And if it goes down, then it goes back through that process and you go and bring another budget up to vote to the populace to see if it goes up.
When you say it goes to the populace at the town budget meeting, whatever we're gonna
No,
call it.
we never have a
No.
town budget meeting. We only have a public hearing regarding the budget, and then we go straight to referendum for
So
each
what
budget.
happens at the public hearing? What is, I mean, it's just
So people-
explained and presented?
Yeah, so
People,
we
ex-
explained,
people
presented-
can bitch and moan, and it sometimes the money goes down and sometimes there's an infusion for something to go up.
so Ira, when
Not
I-
normally,
But
but
I thought you said there's no decision at that public hearing.
Yeah, so Ira, as Board of Finance Chair, it was my job to run that meeting. So
Yeah.
the first one I would show is the draft meeting, which is largely the Board of Selectmen presents the meeting that came from the budget draft that came from their process, and the Board of Ed presents their budget draft. And even though it's the Board of Finance's meeting, really they're having a meeting saying, this is what we're going to start looking at. What do you think? The public
Right.
comments on that first draft. Then there's a series of budget workshops on behalf of the Board of Finance as they review and decide whether or not these two sort of staff generated budgets and that went through those boards are going to then be integrated into the two budget proposals.
Okay,
When the
now-
Board of Finance, hold on, let me finish it up.
Yeah.
When the Board of Finance is done, we notice a public hearing. We then, this time, instead of the first selectman and the Board of Ed chair presenting, it's, the Board of Finance chair stands up and says, we started with these two pieces of data that we showed you 6 weeks ago. Here's what we did. We went up a little, down a little, up a little, down a little, and here's what we came to now. Public, do you have any questions? And the public puts up their comment. And if all the public got up and said, oh my God, you can't do that. You are underfunding, blah, 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 or overfunding, blah, 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 or we really need, better equipment, uniform, something for school. Then the Board of Finance would, at that meeting, usually, they would adjourn the public hearing, trigger a Board of Finance meeting where they would then vote on the final budget. That budget leaves the Board of Finance and then goes to prepare to be voted on by the populace in referendum. So the public hearings are informing the political boards. In that first hearing, it's about saying, how's this first draft look to you? In that second hearing, it's about, we're going to go get this ready to vote. What do you think? And then from that point, it then goes to a ballot and they vote up or down. There is
Okay,
no.
so just so let me just ask, so all of the discussion and the hearings are under the umbrella of Board of Finance?
Yes, these are public hearings
These are
called
all-
by the Board of Finance.
Yeah, okay, so you really have no annual town budget meeting. It goes from multiple Board of Finance hearings
Yes,
to a machine vote.
right. As you are now, and frankly, this has been helpful because as you are now describing it, the meeting that you're trying to describe is one we don't hold because
Okay,
we go
that-
directly into voting.
All right, okay, I didn't understand that, so I think that
But you can
makes,
accomplish that and still be consistent with the state statute by referring that budget after the public hearings, the final budget that the Board of Finance is recommending. You refer it to a town meeting, which is immediately adjourned to a machine vote. Technically, and this is technical, the result is the
I
same.
understand what you're doing, Pete.
People are gonna, vote on it eventually. It's technically not a referendum. The budget is adopted by the town meeting by vote, not by a referendum is a vote on a specific question.
well,
And,
the terminology we'll play with, Pete, but
right, but
But
that's,
they don't have that town meeting is what's being explained to us now. They
Right.
have a series of Board of Finance meetings and hearings. And the Board of Finance might change it, whatever, but it's still under the umbrella of a Board of Finance hearing. And then the Board of Finance, well, typically they recommend it somewhere. You're skipping, it sounds like, the town meeting.
Well,
You're going-
it sounds like that we're doing exactly what Pete says, that we are adjourning a town meeting directly to vote.
that makes it consistent with the statute, Joe. That's what I'm concerned about, because under the statute, the Board of Finance has to recommend its budget to a town meeting. Now, are we, playing with words here? Because if the town meeting is just something where it's immediately adjourn to a machine vote. I mean, I'm drawing a distinction between adjourning a town meeting without any action having been taken, other than it gets convened and immediately adjourned to a vote, to a machine vote. I'm saying that there's a distinction between that and a referendum. It's a distinction without a difference, but it's a distinction, in the wording. Because if you go directly to referendum, theoretically, you haven't referred the budget to a town meeting, which is what the statute says has to happen.
Okay, so we've got to correct our processes then, because the town meeting is a very different thing than the public hearing, because you have to have the registrars, you have to have people signing in. You can't just do it partially. A town meeting is a legislative event, so you do have to have a different set of rules and people to administer that meeting. You have to have somebody setting it up as the, what's the what's the term? What was the person? You were the person, Joe, in the one that was a Zoom based one.
The
moderator.
Moderator.
Yeah,
So
thanks for
there's-
bringing up that painful memory there, John.
Right. So, but I think that's a pretty critical piece that by statute, we have to do this. Is that correct?
Well, but that's how the
Well-
statute, that's what the statute says the Board of Finance does. Now, that town meeting where the budget is referred to the town meeting, that's one of the reasons some towns call it the annual budget, town meeting.
Yeah, that was
Because-
the ATVM I was
Yeah.
talking about earlier, but you don't have that. And it sounds like you sort of don't want
We
it.
have been
No,
functioning
but-
as a budget referendum. That
Right,
is what.
you do. And the process doesn't really have to change as much as the nomenclature.
Yeah.
You could set a separate, for example, you don't need 150 people at the budget town meeting. You could, you don't have to have the kind of, quorum that you need for any other kind of town meeting if you adjourn it directly to the machine.
But are you talking about an actual physical meeting with a place and signing people in, as was stated?
No. I'm
Or-
talking about almost like a straw man public meeting where it's referred to a moderator. There's not an actual gathering of people, and the moderator immediately adjourns that meeting. People could show up if they wanted to, but the only action that's going to be taken would be to adjourn that meeting to a machine vote.
And
We have to
Pete-
notice the
Pete-
meeting?
Well, hold on if I could. Pete, unless I'm mistaken, that's precisely the procedure that the town uses for bonding, for anything that they are going to insist that there's a vote. There have been several occasions where they call a town meeting that they immediately adjourn to a referendum because they're the type of thing that should always go to a referendum. And I need one of the former first selectmen to bring that in, but this is
We're
not
actually doing that in February.
perfect.
For
but
for
there-
the
All right,
bonding
look,
votes in
we-
February, we have a town meeting on February 1st that will automatically adjourn to the referendum on February 15th. And as far as the,
But
Was there a public
can I
notice
just
on
ask
that?
though?
Okay.
Well,
Can I ask at the town meeting on February 1, is that, you're going to put aside COVID considerations? Are you going to say it's at the auditorium and 7 o'clock and, and actually open the town hall for that February 1 meeting?
on this one, yes, we are, but we are not checking people in because there's no action being taken. As far as the budget referendum goes, and I'm trying to pull up a copy of the legal notice because it's one of the ones I don't post. I believe that the legal notice for the budget referendum contains language that says that it is the annual budget town meeting adjourned to referendum. I believe it is in the legal notice that's 15 pages long that gets posted in the newspaper for the budget referendum date. That it's noticed as a town meeting adjourned to referendum.
So
And
wonder
And I
if the-
believe we do
yeah.
it that way because the charter was wonky, and that was on the advice of our former town attorney.
Yeah, and that's fine. I don't know that I would use the word referendum, but that's okay. I mean, that's just a minor, that works.
I think if you put in the charter, that the Board of Finance shall recommend the vote to the town meeting, which shall be immediately adjourned to a, we keep saying machine vote, either machine vote or ballot vote. We got to see what the proper terminology is now, because I've heard both. Which shall be held.
As updated by state statute, please.
Yeah, but that, I think that works. We'll double check that. The only question is, do you have to actually have a moderator sitting there at some time in some meeting room for 2 minutes?
Probably not. Is thinking about that, probably not, but.
Ira, you keep throwing in the word immediately. It's not immediately. The referendum is a couple of weeks after.
No, the town meeting portion of it shall be immediately adjourned. In other words.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to,
Right
because
there.
I was under
Really
the
don't.
mistaken impression that there was a town meeting to talk about the budget. But if your history has been, all the talking occurs at these multiple Board of Finance hearings,
Yes.
I think that's fine. But we're just trying to keep it consistent with the statute, and we'll double check this, and maybe that wording works. The Board of Finance has to recommend the budget to somebody, somewhere. And then it has to get to the machine ballot. So we just have to double check that part.
So if we could, not to dwell here too much longer, Lauren, if you can maybe dig up that notice and send over to Ira, that would be helpful. Then Ira, if that revises your opinion of the annual town budget meeting language, then maybe, frankly, it starts to reduce to almost exactly what it is. Do we want to have an annual meeting where the first selectman gives a state of the town, or do you want to put that under the powers? It becomes now, I think, a much smaller question.
Yes, it makes a difference, because I had the impression that there was an actual physical meeting where people got up and said the budget is too high or the budget is too low.
Oh, they do, but
after the
Board of Finance public hearing.
Right. Okay. No, you've clarified that, and that may change how we look at this.
Okay.
But it doesn't sound like you're going to have what I was saying is the ATBM, the annual town budget meeting, because
Well, you bring up a very good point, if I could, just to resurrect it for a second, is that when you look at the procedure that we use and how it expresses in the charter, we should then make it clear, because if an outsider is looking at our process, case in point in time, you two guys, and you're looking for something that other towns call it, we should probably say the annual town budget meeting is a meeting, adjourned to town referendum to pass the budget. And that way, I think, Pete, you solve your state statute tie-in problems. And that's probably why both us and our predecessor commissions never really got into that, because it wasn't directly applicable.
But you don't want to have the actual physical meeting.
Nope.
Right.
I don't think there's any, I don't think that's a thing that's broken in town to fix.
Okay.
Current process works actually pretty well, and sometimes budgets go down and then you have to go and scramble and run around and get to them. And I've been in that process too, and it's hideous and it's concerning. But I think the thing we addressed in that is get rid of some of the artificial time constraints, which you identified last summer when we spoke to you. And those we pulled out, and that will help us in those emergency times. But most of the time, people say what they want to say at those those public hearings or during the budget workshops, and the town adjusts.
Okay.
So
All right. This is very helpful.
So
Go ahead, Joe.
can we scroll back up to the top of it then? Do we rename that then? Because it isn't really the annual
Yeah, I still don't think that's the
annual
right name for that.
reconciliation. Do you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? I think that we
Well,
need to kind of,
there's two, don't forget. There's the annual town meeting to talk about the audit reports, and then the second one, which we didn't really discuss yet, is
the budget reconciliation. meeting.
Yeah.
Since you brought that up as being an odd thing, my suggestion is recommend it, because we made it optional anyway. And we don't need the charter to empower an optional meeting. The town can have optional meetings anytime they want. Why do we even need this thing? I mean, it's.
I'm
Lauren, it's-
thinking I think we should remove it completely personally.
What, I have to confess, I wasn't sure what it
What it
meant.
was.
Yeah, it talks about the agenda will include those items that exceed the authority of the Board of Finance. And I didn't think things are supposed to be passed that exceeded the authority of the Board of Finance. But are these supplemental appropriations? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, these are appropriations that are needed to balance line items for the end of the fiscal year. So if there are any line items that are overextended, or, bills that came in towards June that needed to get paid and overextended a line item, we would hold this annual budget reconciliation meeting at the June evening, before the June Board of Selectmen evening meeting, and just make sure that we appropriated funding into all the line items that were closing on June 30th.
So you mean somebody can exceed their budget without getting
It would
approval?
it would still have to go through all the normal approval process. So yeah, this is definitely superfluous to how the town runs. It would still need to go to Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and then be recommended to the annual budget reconciliation meeting. So we're just,
I guess I'm sticking my nose into policy more here, but you mean like the police can exceed their budget and then have it approved later? Usually it's.
Yeah, because
you're not supposed to
frankly,
do that.
Ira, it always happens that at some point in time, expenses in June ramp up in a way that you would normally want to hold them to July. And there's a string of what's usually small dollar of accounts that are over or under that probably we should have requested a budget appropriation to move from a line item transfer to move from account A to account B. Instead, the things, it's reality of a gajillion accounts, a messy little zigzag.
Yeah, okay.
Every so often, though, and I don't know how often it's happened in recent years, Lauren, some of the numbers will be big. Snow plowing, if you think about it.
Yeah.
most of what this is overtime. It's police department overtime. It's DPW, building and grounds. It's the union crew overtime.
Yeah. Storms are a good example.
Yes, things that are unknown when the budget is approved, that come in throughout the year, that then make it impossible to balance that line item for June 30th because we have this overtime.
Yeah, all right,
So,
I fully understand. I mean, that occurs. I suggest that, just what Joe said, you don't need that in the charter. You call a Board of Finance meeting to reconcile the budget.
I mean, that's my point. Does it have to be a town meeting? I think it could be a Board of Finance, Board of
It's a Board
Selectmen meeting, correct?
Yeah, I think it is, yeah.
well,
Go ahead, Lauren.
go ahead. We only call it this for items that exceed that departmental threshold, that aggregate so the current charter has an aggregate in each department if no more than $50,000 in appropriation requests throughout one fiscal year. So this is what we do for line items that cannot be line item transferred into, or where the department is asking for an appropriation of funds in excess of their annual aggregate amount.
Right.
But we've increased that aggregate though, right?
We have, and also those items would have to go to a town meeting based on the other parts of this charter. So again, I agree with everybody that this section of the charter can definitely be removed. It kind of seems, I don't know if at one point in time somebody felt very strongly about this, but we would go to a town meeting for these items no matter what.
Yeah, the only thing that would be different is at the end of the year, if you had, and I would, Lauren said the same thing I was gonna say, if they're big, it's a problem. But if they're big, I would, if I were Board of Finance chair again, I would sit there and look at those items and say, all right, I've got 10 of them. I'm going to call a town meeting. I'm going to suggest to the selectmen we call a town meeting to reconcile the 10 of these items so we can make it all okay, which is what you do anyway. It's the only way to do it. This is just saying do it in aggregate. So I think I don't see a harm in killing this off. Lauren, put a bug in Stacy's ear. Because my argument isn't that the meeting shouldn't happen. It's that it just doesn't need to be in the charter.
Well, but it's got now.
And we made it optional anyway. There may be. Why is it may? Because some years it's not big enough.
So it does have to go to a town meeting if it's a certain threshold or in any event.
Yes. So
Mhm.
if the overtime budget is over whatever the number is, 50,000, then we would have to send it to a town meeting anyway. If the overtime budget, the plowing budget, and 4 others are over 50,000, then, think about what you would do. You would then call one town meeting with 4 items on it. That's
Yeah.
all this is.
Do
Well,
you-
so it is another kind of town meeting. So now I'm understanding it. And
Yeah, but we just don't need to call it by charter. We just hold town meet, it's just be a special town meeting.
Right,
we're-
the Board of Selectmen would call it as a
Mhm.
special
well,
meeting.
where
Yep.
does it say they have to call it if it doesn't say it here?
Well,
Oh, it-
if they wanna
Oh, further
appropriate the
down.
money, they have to appropriate the money.
Right. So this
So-
is just talking about our types of town meetings. That's
Okay,
all this is.
so it's covered later under some appropriation.
It's under
Yeah.
special town meeting.
Yeah, so when they do it, they're just calling a special town meeting.
Right.
And what would that special town meeting be? It'd because, hey, we ran over budget on this thing here.
Okay, so it doesn't need its own section.
Right.
And Lauren, I keep trying to scroll your document, which is killing me. I'm sorry.
Okay, so the consensus is
Kill it.
that could be
Yes.
deleted because it's covered under other sections, basically.
Yeah.
Okay, I got it. See, I mean, look, this discussion is very helpful for me, and I'm sure for Pete. So I didn't quite understand what this meeting was about. So, you want our input, but we need your input too. So,
Well, but
this
it's
is very
also
helpful.
helpful, Ira. You see a lot of charters. If you're looking at something like, what the heck is this? I don't recognize it, means it may be a charming and unique portion of the Madison histology, history. So
I was going to say to Ira's point, though, that's the thing. I think after we get to digest, your overall comments, there might be things, as Joe said, like, oh, those are easy fixes. That's what we're already thinking
Yeah,
about.
no, and there may
If
be
we do
things
have
that,
questions, we can come back to you.
yeah, we just may, not follow some of the customs, traditions, or even what you're getting at. So with that caveat, I just want to say that because that was very helpful. Both these discussions were helpful. And we'll take that into account.
So Ira, let me then suggest that what we should do, because we're clearing 7 o'clock. Why don't you take that out? Let's get your comments, but I'm wondering, Lauren, is there anything wrong if a couple of us meet with the attorneys in smaller session? Just to go over pre-review the document beforehand in a working group?
That would be helpful.
And there's nothing wrong with it as long as it's not a subcommittee. If it's
Mhm.
less than a quorum of the,
Yeah, less than a quorum.
if it's less than a quorum of the group and it's not a subcommittee, then
I don't talk, I don't have the intention to do as much substance per se, but to kind of clear this in preparation of the items for the main committee, so that
Yeah.
we don't rabbit
Yeah.
hole everybody.
Right, and we may have, if we have missed the boat on something completely, then let's do that before we meet as a group.
So
Just
Lauren,
just on that reconciliation, I mean, now that I see it, I think probably most towns do that. You have to, I recognize, I'll refer to Westport again because I've lived here my whole adult life, but every June they have this kind of reconciliation meeting. So
Yeah.
that's now understood now. I didn't follow.
yeah,
before.
because if you think about it, otherwise your budget's meaningless.
Yeah, and they transfer
Spend an
and,
extra $2 million on a $50,000 line item.
Yeah.
So Lauren, maybe what we can do is ask Pete and I to go through, give us a document. Perhaps you, me, and any one volunteer that would care to join us, and we'll set a time, can go through. And my goal isn't to pre-approve the comments, but to kind of triage them. And then we can go through and then queue that up, deliver it to the whole board, and then have this meeting after everyone's had a chance to read it as a way to move us along. And Ira, even though we just identified a peculiarity that makes like our town meeting structure a little better than it appeared on first read, I think the entire commission, I hope, is highly interested in finding out on things that we do that are out of step of the world of charters. So maybe something like this, where frankly our process is probably okay, but there may be 10 other things that just because the town's done them this way doesn't mean they shouldn't be expressed differently in the document.
Yeah. Okay.
Does that sound all right
yeah.
Does that
This
procedure?
has actually turned out to be very illuminating, and I think it makes things a little clearer for Pete and me.
Excellent. Good. Well,
Absolutely.
I'm glad there are opportunities for us to improve and that we're also not quite as screwed up as we thought. So that sounds excellent. I feel
The old stuff is, not the new stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And we can then support the wisdom of the current charter commission and dealing with legacy language that exceeds probably the lifespan of anybody on the screen.
Okay, Justin, Lauren, are you able to send us that Word version of this latest document? And, next,
I already did.
you already did. What took you so long?
Exactly. Are you guys done with it yet? I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
really. I'll have it done tomorrow. Right.
Excellent.
It's going to take just a little bit of time. And next week I have some personal commitments that are going to keep me out for a couple of days. But we'll get rolling. So maybe before we set another date, let us try to make a dent in this as soon as we can, and probably talk to you, Lauren, and we can talk about a date. But I like the idea of having a sort of a pre-meeting with a couple of you, just to get your thoughts. To maybe we can, then fine tune it a little bit before we meet as a group again.
I think that'd be great, and we can kind of go through it. And since former Selectman Walker popped her hand up, maybe we can do it because at least we've been through this part of the process. And then
I think Matt had his hand up too, right, Matt?
Yeah,
ah,
I would be happy to. Absolutely.
okay, there we go. So that we have a committee of we have a pre-committee, and we can kind of talk our way through it. But then we'll give it to everyone else, and then we'll triage it. And maybe what we can do is once we get that document and everyone's had a chance to read it, I can ask you to kind of cut and paste the sections that you're most interested in terms of for discussion, and just send those back to Lauren, and we can kind of aggregate them up.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions of these guys or thoughts before we start to move to the end of our session?
It's less scary now that we worked through that than what we heard originally. So
Yeah.
No, it is. Yeah. Your clarifications about some of these things have been very, very helpful. So thank you.
In that case, I'd like to call Joe, I see that your hand is up in the audience, and I would welcome your comments. Lauren, I see Joe Mako's got his hand up.
Do you want us to hang around still?
I think we will move you off the clock. So, but thank you guys very much.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
I appreciate
All
it.
right. All right. Thank you all. Yeah. Have a good evening. We'll be in touch
Have a
soon.
good evening.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. And welcome, Joe. What can we do for you?
Good evening, members of the Charter Revision Committee. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, great. Well, it was interesting listening to the attorneys because I've been in town about 50 years, and I believe the process was exactly as he thought it was. But then somewhere along the line, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, we moved that automatic to a town referendum into the town budget meeting. So I don't know when that was done, but it was certainly done a number of years ago, because they didn't want to crowd a lot of people in some night and find out we're going to a budget referendum anyway. So they dragged everyone out for a night for nothing.
That's very helpful to know, Joe.
Yeah, so it was done some time ago. Now, as far as the legacy of the town charter, you're absolutely right. In fact, you refer to a lot of this as legacy stuff, but there's a reason for some of it, and it's transparency. So just be careful when you make changes, you're not reducing the transparency of the town document.
I think that's a point well taken. And I think for each of these things, like the reconciliation conversation we were having, it would be one thing to eliminate that meeting as a charter meeting, quite another one if we weren't confident it was going to happen separately, right? Because what you don't want to do is knock the process off. But I think that's a very good, that's a good admonition to keep an eye on.
Okay, and here's the thing, a little controversial now. I've been in town almost 50 years. And when I first moved to town, I questioned why the Planning and Zoning Commission wasn't elected, it was appointed. And in light of the recent happenings in town, both with the interference of political entities with the Planning and Zoning Commission and what's happening with the development of downtown, I would like to recommend that in the charter revision, you make the Planning and Zoning Commission an elected board.
Well, you know, Joe, we can, as you may remember from some years ago, I had a different opinion on that personally. But why, Lauren, why don't we, it's been brought up to us, why don't we advance it for discussion at our next meeting to see if there's any interest in taking that on?
Okay.
All right. And thank you. Anything else, Joe?
No, no, that's it. As I said, I was quite concerned with the happenings here in the last couple of months or so with all the development on the Post Road downtown, changing the character of downtown. And I think that's some of the beauty of Madison is what we have on the Post Road, not another Westport. So I really would like to, voice my concern about having a Planning and Zoning Commission voted on by the electorate as opposed to appointed.
Yeah, for what it's worth, and I don't want to bog down in this. I remember if you might recall, this was a referendum issue many years ago. And my concern at the time was that since commissioners, most of what commissioners need to do is to vote on whether or not something, even if it's unpopular, follows the zoning laws, that if it's elected, you do run into some problems. But I will tell you that I don't know what it is today, but at the time, Connecticut was about half and half. That I think we were about half elected and half appointed. But you've brought up the issue, and why don't we open it up for some conversation next time?
Joe, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I appreciate you coming, and please come next time if you're free.
Yes, thank you, Joe.
Excellent. Any other comments from commissioners? All right, well, this turned out to be a meeting that did open up on some dire notes and ended up on a slightly better posture, but I am quite happy actually to have them do the type of review they're doing and bring up the questions to see if there's something that, if it sounds weird to their eyes, no, God, that's terrible. If it reads weird to their eyes, then we should be figuring that it's either A, it's all right because of the process we use, or B, we should take a harder look at it. So the only thing, Lauren, that strikes me is we should perhaps revisit with Peggy the calendar for when we would then give it to the Board of Selectmen.
Yes. So you guys do have a meeting set up already for next week. We have it on tentatively next Wednesday, and we actually, I put it on the calendar for both Wednesday or Thursday, depending on if the CIP committee is done with their work and doesn't need their Thursday night meeting. So in order to keep with the timeline of getting this on the May 15th budget referendum, you guys would have to submit your final document to the Board of Selectmen by February 28th.
Well,
Which
I think that's still possible. Let's see what the attorney review comes to.
yeah. And I
But-
think at your next meeting, then you would want to call your final public hearing.
Yeah, but let's, why don't we do this? If you could let the first selectman know that there's a chance, depending on the speed and thoroughness of the attorney review, that we may blow that date. And let's see what that does to their expectations. That's how
Okay.
I'm looking at it, because albeit we had the holiday in the middle, but they had that document about 7 or 8 weeks ago, right? I think you probably sent to them in early December. Is that about
The
right?
attorneys, yeah.
Yeah.
And not for the first time. I mean, that version of it, yes, but prior
Yeah.
drafts had gone to them right before Thanksgiving as well.
That's about what I remember. So,
Yeah.
so
In other words, they were really slow, so I wouldn't have great expectations that they're going to be fast this time. I hope I'm wrong.
well, I think we can talk with Ira and speed him along,
Okay.
if need be. And also, frankly, it's Thanksgiving and Christmas and year end, and a lot of times when attorneys are more difficult. I mean, that's a firm that specializes in the type of work that we're having them do. You know what, Lauren, now that we're talking about it, would you do me a favor, please? Would you
Mhm.
communicate with Ira that we would like to be on a path to approve this document by February 28th. And
Yeah.
let's see what he says in return. I didn't think to bring that up while he was still here with us.
Good question.
And, you know, and if we need to miss the May vote, I don't know that anything terrible happens. It then just moves to the next time that they'll do it, which may be election day, which might not be the worst idea either. Then you have a lot of people voting on it.
The public hearing, how, we need 2 weeks notice, correct, Lauren?
Yes,
3?
it's a 10-day notice. So you would want to do it probably the week of February 21st, and then maybe like the 21st or 22nd, and then you'd have the rest of that week to make any changes that come from public comment. So
Right.
you would have to put it in the newspaper on February 10th.
Yeah, I'm very much concerned. I'd like to make sure that if these guys are doing that type of review where they're comparing it to other charters and balancing it, maybe it'll devolve into nothing. I think a lot of their concerns had to do with exactly the section we sort of knocked out in an hour. And it might be that if when we get to them and they've finished their review, that we might be able to have other areas like that, but there could easily be areas of substantial concern that would be invisible to our eyes, you know? And we didn't even get to the emergency powers, which is what I thought the primary point of this discussion would be. So I don't know, let's ask Ira about that timing. That means they can reallocate resources into that piece and see how it goes. And you know what, Lauren, maybe if you could ask him for a meeting time so that Joan Matten and I can do our and you're going to be there, can do our pre-meeting, because that is an automatic process point where if we set that, then it's got to be done.
Mhm.
And if that's in 2 weeks, it's one thing. If that's in 3, then the game's over.
Yeah,
All right. Still alert the first selectman that there might be problems on the timing.
I will.
Okay.
So just, one thought, I mean, it's out of the scope of this commission, but if it took us so long to deliberate, especially with 2 very experienced people, that, in Madison, in the political life, how the heck is the lay public supposed to figure this stuff out? It's very esoteric. And even when we do it in the charter, sure, we can clarify, we can say, these are the meetings, the board of selectmen and stuff like that. But what we don't capture is a sequence. So I don't know, maybe in a different life outside this commission, it'd be nice to even outline this for people in the town so they can understand.
Yeah, I think
Why we have a republic, it's.
I do think actually Joe Mako's point was pretty good about, if most big things have to be brought up to the public, then most of the time it's okay. And whether it shows up in a public hearing or a town meeting or a vote, as long as if something large is going on, you have to flag the public, then most people will figure out, okay, then things are all right. I think there's a lot to that. Just in terms of the actual process, whether or not how they petition and whether it's a meeting versus a hearing, I think there's always a case in point, if there's issues around zoning, if there's issues around development, there's issues around a specific item that they want in terms of the budget, then you'll always get a couple of people who will figure out how many signatures they need to advance a question. They'll petition. We've seen it happen in this town, not very often, but controversy will breed a specialist. But I think for the general public, they just need to know that they're consulted when something's big or off kilter. I don't know, that's my thinking, because I think it's our concern, and I don't think there's anything we've done here that changes that. We've increased some of the numbers that are more nuisance value in hope that the signal of, if they're calling a town meeting, it's big or off kilter. I think that's a lot of what we did.
Well, I think the thresholds that we've increased is just reflective of the population of the town and the growth. So I don't think anything that we've done so far is out of sort.
And also 40 years of inflation.
Yeah.
For some of it.
When we talked a little bit about in the beginning, I think how the last effort didn't move forward. And I guess, some of what we're talking about now is also We do hold these public hearings and we do offer opportunities to ask questions, but again, presenting this so it does go through after all this work. What do we need to do as it relates to that? Just thinking about that. And again, that's not an easy lift. I mean, we're seeing some of that play out now with some of what's going on, with the upcoming referendum. So how much do you educate the public on what? It is confusing. You want it to pass. You want them to see that you're making an effort to try to make it more, modern, but yet keeping some of the things that make it rich. So just a thought.
We should have a discussion on communications at some point, because somehow we've got to get the gist across as to what this is and what it isn't.
I think Joe made me the director extraordinaire of communications last year. So we can work on it. But I hear your point, and yeah, actually the referendum that we have coming up, you see it flooded everywhere. It's now common conversations. Like, how did they get that into the public's mind? And can we do the same thing about this as well too?
On the other hand, I don't know that people have the same passions on
No,
charter review
no,
as
definitely
they
not.
do
Yeah.
with property reallocation.
The price tag.
Yeah,
This is an updating of the town charter.
Yeah, well, I mean, look,
this
there are
isn't a
some-
revolution.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of merit in looking through some of the changes, taking that step back and try and guess what's controversial. So at one point in time, we talked about providing salaries to selectmen. And we originally had a formula, then we went to the Board of Finance could. I think if we were proposing salaries to the selectmen, even if the dollars were small, I think it'd be really controversial. I think if we were proposing a town manager, clearly we'd have lots of conversation that would come up. But if they wanted to include a budget referendum saying, should the town, launch a second charter review commission to update for a town manager, it would be a fascinating question to get that type of input. It's the only way I think that question ever gets really resolved.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of what we took out newspapers and we increased some dollar amounts. I don't think that's gonna bring out people for or against. I think that's the type of workman-like stuff that they'd hope the Charter Review Commission would do.
Right.
Excellent. I do have an open question in my mind as to where, we still have nothing really much on the emergency powers. If you really look at it, we haven't done that much on emergency powers. We haven't really clarified Board of Finance or Board of Selectmen much. We've done a little bit.
Right.
So
That's
I
a
don't
major
know
issue.
if when we go back and forth, if we have a concrete proposal on it, even increasing the Board of Finance to 6 members, to 7 members will be controversial in a sense. I just don't know that people write folk songs about it. All right. Well, good. Well, this was more exciting, but hopefully going to lead to a better spot than I thought, at 5:30. Otherwise, Lauren, let us know we have the Wednesday and Thursday noticed for next week for our meeting. Yes. And
Yes, and I will know by Tuesday if the CIP needs to meet on Thursday.
okay.
So if you guys are okay with going with Thursday, that's fine. Or if you want to pull the plug and make the decision now to go to Wednesday, that's fine too.
Wednesday will work for me, but Liz, you'll have to take over for the first 40 minutes or so because I'm teaching till 5, and usually a little bit then some. But I can float in as soon as I'm done. So, but otherwise, it works with me. I will have been lecturing for 3 hours, so forgive me if I don't use things like verbs. But are you guys okay with Wednesday?
Either date.
Yeah, Wednesday or Thursday is fine.
Yeah, if CIP happens on Thursday, I can't do Thursday because I have CIP on Thursday, but I don't anticipate, hopefully the public hearing will go well and there won't be a lot of potential changes. I think if the public hearing goes well, we'll be voting that evening to move it forward. So
Matt, do the days work for you?
Yeah, Wednesday works. Thursday's shaky though.
Well, then why don't we move to Wednesday, and Liz, if you'll just lead the beginning of the conversation, and I'll show up, you know, I might be drifting in as late as 5:45. But otherwise, you know, give me the summary when I appear.
Yeah, I'll be joining late on a Wednesday. Hand has a hockey game in Stamford in the afternoon, so I should be over by about 5:30 or so.
Wow.
Do we
Okay.
want to move the actual meeting to 5:30?
To work for you?
Just a
Yeah.
thought?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, so let's do it at 5:30. Dave and I are going to continue to coordinate outfits for the rest of the time. Matt, if you would kindly grow a goatee and shave your head as well, that would be spectacular.
yes, but I did put my glasses on this time, so now we
Oh,
all have
You're
glasses.
kind of getting, yeah, you're the most studious commission. All right, in that case, I will see you guys then Wednesday at 5:30, and we'll take it from there.
Good
Okay,
session,
thank you.
guys.
All right,
Good
thank you.
night.
Good
All
night.
right, see you guys.
Thank you,
Good
Lauren.
night. Good night.
Thanks.
Lauren.
Night.
See you guys.
Thanks, Joe.